So we didn't start out thinking we were going to build a policy system. So in fact, we were dragged kicking and screaming into doing it. And because we thought, no, that's going to be harder. It's going to complicate things.
This is the Insurance Technology Podcast, where we bring interesting people from across the insurance ecosystem to discuss and debate technology's impact on the industry. Join us each episode for insights and best practices from industry stewards and tomorrow's innovators. Now, here's your host, Reid Holsworth.
All right, we're back with Doug Roller. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the founding of Duck Creek. We're going to learn who were all of the people that helped Doug and were influencers in his career. Surprise, you're going to hear a lot of the same names you've heard on this podcast before. They're all connected. It's really, really cool. He's also going to share some insights for all of you young startups out there. It's really good advice. Stay tuned. So basically, you had this group of people that you had a very heavy hand in over the years and building out that office, that operation. Some of the people are probably originally there from the Micro Magic years.
Oh, yeah. They were lifers.
And so it was like, hey, they're not doing a whole lot. Why don't we kind of get the band back together and let's build something new leveraging this team? And so rating is a big thing. And so you're the guy, you're the rating guy, right? And so you kind of got the band back together and did you just decide, hey, let's go start this company, right? And we can take the people. Did you get the same office? Like, how did that work?
We didn't want the same office, but that's what we got.
So
we
really,
didn't like that office. It was dark.
Wow.
And it had low ceilings, and I didn't really like it a lot. But that was all that was available in Bolivar, Missouri, when the time came.
So you
that's
literally
that's still in the future. Before we got there, some of us thought, let's try something other than insurance.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so we did. That very same group of people, or pretty much that same group of people, decided, this was probably in 1998 or so, decided we were going to reinvent the education system, or the education software system, which was just beginning to flourish. And we put together a proposal for a grant that was several $1 million that would have funded what we were doing. We put together all of the plans for it, the specifications, and it was basically, we called it Little Web Schoolhouse. And the idea was we were going to provide an unprecedented level of automation for teaching children. And so this grant was perfect for us, we thought, and we put it all together and put it in, and it was turned down. And the sad thing was that it was turned down. There were there were 7 people who approved it or didn't approve it. 6 of them, it was their top choice. 1 of them felt like anything that made money in the education space was not right, and we lost that grant. And that's which, you think about, well, Duck Creek wouldn't have happened. The grant could have gone 1,000 ways, but we were at the pits of despair for a little bit of time after that. And then we thought, all right, I had been working with XML, and Andy Jan, who is just a remarkable programmer, still with Duck Creek, and that whole group, Andy, Carrick, Ken, Toller, Barry Tate, Rebecca, John, they were so smart, and we decided that we didn't want to take on the existing world of AMS's rating system. We wanted that to last and to keep that relationship. And if we had come out with something to compete with them, an agency management system or another rating system or something like that, So we decided we'd go into the carrier space. And
well, hold on. Were there non-competes though? Like, were there contractual things that you couldn't go into the agency space?
So none for me. In fact,
there was concern. We'll just say there was concern a little bit.
So there are always possibilities that you could do something that could get you in trouble if you're imitating someone else's software. So yes, that was part of the problem. One of our another thing that happened is when we went to AMS at that point, they were offering severance to any employees who wanted to leave. They were trying to be good. So this in late 2000 or 1999, we were trying to put this whole organization together, and the guys were going to be able to work for maybe 6 to 8 months without being paid because they were going to get their salary. And that happened for every.
Wow. So that was, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That they were going through that kind of thing where they were just trying to really.
They wanted to consolidate, move it all out, and so David was gone, and this was actually, gosh, what company owned them at that point?
Yeah, who would it have been? I don't know.
I don't remember, but it was nothing. It was nothing like the AMS that was there before. I will say that a year or two later, John Ashenhurst and Ewan Menzies came on board, and when they did, they had a mess to clean up, and they did a great job of doing, or at least John Ashenhurst is one of the smartest guys I've ever known, and Ewan is very smart. So that was all, but we'll put that to the side.
Yep.
Because what I think was happening now is, what problem do carriers have,
right?
And how can we fix it? I had been working I had worked at a school district as their part-time technology administrator. And I wrote a grant for them, and we did some other things with the school district. And in that process, I got hold of all of this cool new software that was coming out. This was when Microsoft was introducing Windows, would have been 95 and 98 and all the ones. And the browser was coming out and all kinds of things. And XML came, and I became intrigued with what you might do with XML by using it to mark up. So I sat down and I wrote initially a program to do grading for teachers. So teachers could mark up a sheet with answers and correct answers and so forth, and we could run it through the school server, and they could get their grades they would grade their tests if they were objective tests. It was not good. I mean, but it taught me that there was some potential for taking things that had always been sort of underneath the surface and invisible, and making it possible potentially to mark up information or mark up a file in a way that would let you do all of the things. You could run any file that marked it up into the server, and boom, you could have rates. Well, we thought, what if we could also do not just rates, but all the rules, all of the rest of what has to be done to, and so we began to think about the rating engine. We thought this is going to be the world's greatest rating engine. People are going to plug it in and use it. And it was a great rating engine, but nobody wanted a rating engine that wasn't also, and David told me this initially, David Rowe, no one's going to buy it if it's not also policy admin. And we didn't believe it. But so that's how, so we built it, and this began in 2000. We moved into our office on January the 17th, I think, of 2000, and started Duck Creek.
That's awesome. Yeah. So so you're basically grabbing the organization, what you had before, the same office, the people. We're going to build this awesome rating engine, but were going to build an actual policy administration system as well.
Yes.
Talk about it. Like,
so we didn't start out thinking we were going to build a policy system. So
yeah.
In fact, we were dragged kicking and screaming into doing it. And because we thought, no, that's going to be harder. It's going to complicate things. In some ways, however, it turned out making it easier, obviously, because one system was all the same things. And David was the guy initially who said, you'll never get it to do anything. However, our first few customers bought just a rating engine, and they paid a lot of money for it. And we thought, maybe it's going to work. But we found out that was a small market. We had 5 companies in the healthcare space that bought us to do rating and quoting on their platforms.
Wow.
And so it was an interesting time, but a woman had joined our company named Wendy Corman, who came. She started out as a manager in a company that was actually doing business with us, and that company was struggling, and she really was so sharp and so proactive on what she did that she was looking for a place to land, and we just offered her a job. She was an East Coast girl and a woman, and just so driven and smart that she became our person who really led sales, probably for the first 5 years at Duck Creek, until we reached about $20 million. She was the first person and the main person on the sales side. So that I'm trying to think where I was going with that. But she, as we started to decide that we were going to have to do carrier stuff, we just changed direction. About the time we were coming out with these systems, which was in 2000, 2001, when 9/11 hit, every carrier crawled into a hole, stayed there for the next 6 months. But coming out, we made our first large insurance sales that were policy systems, as well as some large rating engine sales. And it was clear at that point that we were going to make it, and that this was something that people needed, both in the rating engine world and in the non-rating engine world, policy administration world. So I will stop there and let you ask any questions that you have about it. I can say that within the first 5 years, we were at 20 million, which was pretty fast growth. And
that's
it became
very
too fast. At one point, we were running through those so fast that we had some bad implementations. And so we slowed down. We had to buy back or give back money a couple of times in the process. But we tried always to do what was right for the customer, which was, we didn't argue. We saw, we just said, hey, we understand. And hopefully that paid dividends over time.
Yeah. Well, it goes to show, Doug, you even saying that now and just kind of bringing that out, what type of person you are, and just being like, hey, look, we ran really fast, and it's almost like you're still sorry about that to those customers. And it's not almost like it. Tell me. That's what it seems like, and it happens to everybody, and it's how you handle it, right?
Yeah. And
it sounds like it still weighs on you a little bit, but look, the Duck Creek story doesn't end there. No. Duck Creek has crushed it. For those who don't know, recently went public. We'll talk about this in a second. Yeah. Before we go all there, tell me about the founders, though. Tell me about kind of your crew of the Duck Creek. Tell me about the founders. And also, I think everybody always asks, where'd the name come from? Right?
Okay. So I'll go through a little list at some point of people, but I'm going to start with the founders. There's so many other people that are involved in it, and I'd like to mention them.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
But I'll start by saying that the founders at Duck Creek, the ones who walked in on that first day, and this leaves out, we did have a student who was getting ready to go to college who came on and worked with us for a while. And he was also extremely talented. But he was gone not too long after, so I don't include him. But I'll talk about the founders, and I'm going to attach a phrase with each one of them.
All right.
There's Andy Yon, and Andy was just the most remarkable, fastest programmer in the West. And his phrase, I've always said, was "ship it." He was ready to put it out. We had Carrick Tweedy, who was a thoughtful, took his time to make good decisions person. And Carrick's concern always was, let's make sure it's right. Let's don't throw it out there yet. And so there were endless conflicts a little bit between Carrick but you always knew you were going to get to a really good balance when, by the time they shipped it. So I say his phrase is, let's fix it. Ken Toller was another one of the founders. Ken also had been very early. All of these guys so far were Micromagic people. In fact, all of these people ultimately were Micromagic, although these first few were original Micromagic. They were there in the very early days. We had maybe 8 or 10 people on the staff. Ken was also one of the guys looking more at the conservative side. I'd say Andy and I were always sort of let's get going with something. But Ken Toller was responsible for our Friday funnies. He would always take what had happened that week and I wish I could still find some of them, but he brought people's morale up. But he was also the person inside who was most involved in our data and in how our data would work, and in things like rate lookups and calculation pieces and so forth. Barry Tate was another founder, and he hardly said a word. He sat and coded all day. He was a very productive person. But also a very careful person. Rebecca Roller, you'll recognize the last name, was my sister-in-law and my brother John's wife. And she was our marketing person. So she's, I think of her as the person that helped share the word for Duck Creek. John, her husband, was always thoughtful about what's important to be done tomorrow, and he could do it all. If whatever it was, he was our first financial guy. He could have run the company. In fact, it probably would have been better had he run the company. And then there was Doug, and John's phrase was, "What's important to do today?" And my phrase was always, "What day is it?" But I was always a little bit lost in where we were going. But that's the list of founders. There were other people that I think came along, but we can talk about those later. I do want to mention
please
one.
do bring them up. Yeah, I mean the people that made an impact on your career and Duck Creek and all of that. Let's list them out. I mean, who are some of these influential people in your life? I mean,
well, I'll talk about a friend of mine who wasn't really a permanent Duck, but was with us for a few years. His name was David Hacker. We ran together. We've been friends forever. He was a lead vocalist in our band, but he also worked inside of our recruiting office at Duck Creek for a while, along with some other, I think, really talented HR people. And David coined the phrase "undifferentiated stem cells" for what kinds of people we would be looking for when we brought new people in. And it would be, because there are so many roles and we don't know where things are going, you have to think about finding really smart people who quickly can adapt and become what's needed. And so many people came into the organization, particularly our younger people came in, some of them introverts, some of them extroverts, some thoughtful, some impulsive, but all very smart and talented in their own way. And then, the thought was, let's bring those people on board and then make sure, as some of the business books talk about, the right seat on the bus. We'll find the right place for them. And, that was an important thing. I would say my brothers, I had another brother, Jim, who was also in a company, who was very good and did lots of great things. Bob First, I've already mentioned. Dan Howe was an agent that, to me, really made a huge difference in our organization in Micromagic in getting us into the agent markets. He introduced us to the people at the Big I and other places, and it was huge. We talked about David. We've talked about Dennis. Ewan Menzies and John Ashenhurst are both people that I think brought chaos out of order with what was happening at AMS, and really turned it around. Larry Wilson and the Columbia team, I think, because of their P&C insurance knowledge, came in, and it at times when it was hard for us to find the right people locally, they brought people in who were ready to go on almost anything. The only times that we experienced challenges there was when the concepts and the models were different in some ways, was helping them to adapt to what had happened in terms of the way we thought about rating and policy management. But we would have never made it without Larry and his team. Steve Hall, down the stretch, he was our CEO, and he did tremendous work in terms of getting us ready for acquisition. And at that point, he knew that world. He'd worked in a large healthcare insurance company, so he was a person who helped us as we were moving toward the finish line, and just provided. And he and I negotiated the sale to
Accenture.
I'm sorry, to Accenture, and it was a monumental task, I'll say. And Steve and I, Steve was on the West Coast in Seattle at the time, and I was in Missouri, and we spent a lot of time on the phone together. And now when we get together, we have these conversations about remember back when, because that was probably the most stressful time in both of our lives as we went through that. But it turned out to be a great thing for Duck Creek. And that's why the Duck Creek thing I think of as being a very intentional company versus Micromagic being kind of an accidental company. Yeah.
An accidental company that set the stage, though, for what Duck Creek became. Sorry. So talk a little bit about that. Like Duck Creek, you guys kind of super scaled. And then, hey, Accenture comes along and says, we think that this could be really good in our portfolio. And talk about as little as much as you want, like kind of how that worked. I mean, everybody knows that what happened was, and if it's okay for me to say, that Accenture acquired Duck Creek, which you became at Accenture. And then essentially, Accenture being one of probably the biggest, if not one of the biggest SIs, global SIs out there with all the big clients, it became a bit of a conflict, though, more than anybody kind of anticipated, right? And it's kind of funny because you'd think that would work. And everybody knows, too, that SIs are always, maybe not at this level of like acquiring a Duck Creek, but always trying to build software products and become software companies. And kind of that joke is always like, but you're not. You're like, you're an SI. Like you don't make money in this way historically and traditionally. And it doesn't ever seem to work. And in this case, they made a big bet And it's not that it didn't work, but it just became a conflict to the customer base, right? Am I wrong in saying that, Doug?
Well, so I think that part of it was Accenture never thought that they were going to, take the entire service market, because really, in reality, the only part of that market that they were really interested in were the large carriers, the ones that would end up in larger engagements. There were times when the line between what was large and small, or smaller might not large and smaller, but large and pretty big, might have been a debate. I found the Accenture people to be among the smartest people we ever worked with in terms of what they did. I think they themselves, so problems started initially with them, not so much because of, they had a different philosophy about markets and about where we would go, but it was because they themselves didn't have a way to think about a company that was in a software business, a true software business. They didn't understand it. They didn't have their payroll systems and their organization systems didn't really function with that. So Mike Jakowski, who came on board with the Accenture acquisition, had his hands full, but he came out of that same environment.
I guess I forget that. So he was an Accenture guy.
He was an Accenture guy before he came to there, but he had a background. He'd been with Allstate.
That's right.
So he had a background in both worlds, and I thought it was a very smart move for Accenture to do that, because he was very savvy. Mike was very savvy day one about the business itself of what we did, and he had helped build the Accenture Claims product, which was actually a product that we ended up using and selling at Duck Creek. So he had a great mind for understanding what was happening there from the policy side. But it was not a world that most service companies like Accenture are not as familiar with it as, say, Accenture has been. They may have what I would call things that they sell off the shelf, but they're little components of things that they then use elsewhere. Most of them don't build enterprise software. And that was where Duck Creek had, I think, the experience to bring to bear to help them get there. Many of their software developers have stayed with them and have become really good at the model that Duck Creek uses. So it turned out to be, I think, in the long run, beneficial, a little stressful, and a little bit of time, a little identity crisis at the beginning, and even down through the next few years.
It's an amazing story. I've gotten to know the folks over at Duck Creek, and I mean they're a great crew. They are really good. Yeah, they are. And under Mike's leadership, Mike's a great guy, awesome guy. Some really smart people and kind of just fun-loving people over there too. Buttoned up at the same time, but not to the extreme. And so I've really enjoyed Duck Creek's culture and the team overall. And they do a lot in the industry. They're very involved in the industry. A lot of those guys. Yeah. It's pretty cool, man. And then so I mean, after all of that, they recently went public, which was really successful. Big win for a lot of folks. Yeah. And Mike's still running the ship over there. Good for him, man. I mean, that's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome.
I think the people that are there because they love it, not because they have to be there.
Yeah,
and that says a lot.
So what about you, Doug? Have you worked on anything since the Duck Creek thing? It's kind of like, did you go back into retirement like you did in the early days when you said, I'm going to go retire for a bit, and then you kind of got like, because I've kind of been there for a short period of time too, and you get a little like stir crazy. Yeah. Are you actually now retiring? or are you still kind of involved in some things? And I know you're so involved in some things, but like at what level are you kind of involved in things these days?
So right now, the only level that I'm in is the board level. And I'm on the board of two companies. One, which is Juxley, is in the healthcare space, and they're really focused on Medicare Advantage and on improving patient outcomes, as well as understanding patients who patients at risk are and how that works. It's a small company, and they're hired by a very smart person, Howard Follis, who was actually a physician for a number of years and retired. This is his second time through too, so he's done a company before. The other one that I'm still on is JMark, which is actually an insurance services company, or not an insurance, but an IT services company, and they've just done amazing work in growing that business. The person who owns that business, or who owned it, is a guy that I grew up or knew as he was growing up, Tom Douglas, and so I've enjoyed watching them because they set such an example for how companies should operate, for how they're employee centric. They are very focused on defining their outcomes and then managing toward them. They're a model company, and I think Tom he's one of those guys who's just an extremely talented CEO, and I've known him since he was a kid, which is something, and you might not have ever guessed that he would grow up to be that, but he is one of the nicest and smartest people I've ever worked with. So
that's awesome. Well, hey, staying busy. That's good.
Yeah. I keep thinking the other thing I'm doing is trying to write. I'm doing some writing, and it's gone slowly, but it's picking up pace now. So
that's awesome. So one thing, going back, I don't think you ever answered. How did the Duck Creek name come about?
So Becky, my sister-in-law, John's wife, came up with the name. But Duck Creek was a creek that ran through my grandfather's farm in Oklahoma. And when we were kids, we played there and had a lot of fun. And so there's nothing complex or arcane about the name. It's just named after a creek that we had great memories of. And they couldn't think of another name that they liked better. And it was the time in marketing where everybody was naming things after ducks or after some plant, or, so, and that continued until we ran out of them. And now people do absurd names that don't belong to anything. So,
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. It was a creek that your family and friends played around in and had really great memories.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I think it makes a lot of sense,
we
right?
Did it. We did it for our grandpa, really.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
He was a great guy, and we all had known him well. And
what about Micro Magic? Where did that come from? Was it because you guys were in the body shop and then they were spraying paint? You guys were all high on fumes?
we didn't know that was a totally made up name of my own. It was not a great name. I had a local guy make our logo and put a sign that originally was hung. It was not, when we started, the agency's name was the Apple Agency, but it was named not for that Apple. It was named, so it always, and it still has on that window, it still has the Apple Agency as the.
Oh, that's cool.
Agency. So,
do you have the Micro Magic sign? I asked because Dennis has the AMS sign in his garage. I don't know if you've seen it. When he was like chairman or whatever it was of AMS, he has that plaque in his garage. It's pretty cool.
I think I could probably find you a picture of that in my pictures. It's hanging on the wall in our apartment here in Springfield. So,
see, I knew it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it brings back lots of fun memories.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I want to tell one story.
Sure.
That I think represents the customers at Duck Creek and also at Micromagic and what we did. So one Christmas, you're familiar with the company, Auto Owners, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, a little bit,
yeah.
Yes.
So Bob was one of our first customers, and he was a very strong negotiator. He wanted to get everything that he could just the way that he did. But in return, he said, I will be your best customer. So on a Christmas or on a New Year's Day, it was a New Year's Day, I'm at home and I get a call from Bob, and he's calling to let us know that his servers have gone down. His examples, the name of our platform was the Example platform. The Example server was down, and he was out of luck. Nobody was home, so I went to my computer and looked at the status of the server and found out that it was a trial. It was a trial server, and it had expired. And so we turned it on. I had a person there who helped me, do it. And then I just turned it on, and he was back in business again. So Bob then did so many things for our company. He was very big fan. And one year, as about the time that I was getting ready to leave, I got a call. Also, again, this was from Bob, and I'm going, oh my gosh, what's happened now? And he said, I'm just calling you to tell you there's nothing going wrong at all with what's going on at Duck Creek. And so it was one of those times. I can't say it the way that he said it. It doesn't come across, but it just brought tears to my eyes thinking about that.
That's awesome.
We have a lot of stories like that.
That's phenomenal. So how about some advice from a veteran like yourself that's been there, done that at a massive level? And you know what? I know that there's a lot of people that still reach out to you, pitch you. You probably get a lot of this stuff here and there, but I have a little bit of advice for those guys out there.
Well, I think that the thing that we learned, and I think that our team modeled, was that the customer comes before the technology. And you learn that so many different ways as just one example was we had so many customers telling that we needed to be not a rating platform, but a policy system that, when we were dragged kicking and screaming into it, but the difference in what it did to the company would literally made the company fly, whereas I think it would have crashed otherwise at some point. But it was listening to customers. It was also listening to people that weren't customers, like David Rowe, who kept telling me that'll never work unless you add policy to it. So don't take your product where you want it to be. Is I guess one thing I would say there. It's to take it where the customer wants it to be, or so where your market is maybe a better way to say that, or wants it to be. I would also say that make sure that you if you do something that was not good, something happens, you break something, don't be afraid to take responsibility and be be apologetic, but also remember that you benefit from that. And it's always a growing opportunity to me to see something not go right and then work on it and watch it go right. The other thing, because it's Insurtech, and with the emphasis on the tech side for a minute, I think the thing I would say is, guys, you're working on tomorrow's legacy systems. It's not going to. So you need to bear that in mind and think not just about what you're building for today, but make sure it's going to last, and that it'll be that there'll be something to help leverage you on into the next product that you build, or that someone who comes after you will build, and think about them as well as yourself as you're doing.
That's great advice. Really great advice. And for the listeners out there, you got to hold on to that stuff. Really think about what Doug just said, because these are life lessons, really hold on to that and really think through it, because it's very, very, very true. And you've been there, done that, have grown two massively successful companies, and just have a great story overall. And you've done a lot for the industry. I think that I've had a lot of people on this podcast, and just people in general, have just looked at you as such a innovator and kind of what I consider founder of insurance technology within our industry. So, I mean, it's been awesome. So, Doug, last question. What do you think is going to have the most impact on insurance technology in maybe this year or years to come?
Well, I mean, I think we've been looking at several years where analytics has been an important thing. I think that we will begin to see a real blossoming of AI, and that maybe we're already seeing it in simple ways, but I think that we would be mistaken not to be thinking now just the same way that I remember thinking about what XML was going to be able to let us do before it actually could do anything. It became very useful to us as a markup language. I think that you have to look at things and say, how might this be used? And how are we going to use it, and how we're going to use it maybe in a way that nobody else is, or that others are afraid to do. So I think that would be my advice.
I think so. So I always ask people, who would you recommend that I bring on to this show? What other influencer people?
Let me look at my list here a second. So I'm looking at the list of people who influenced me, and the first ones are my wife, Linda, who always said yes to the wild unknown. So she's not really qualified to do what you're asking for here. but she would be at the top of my list. My dad and grandfather, my brothers. Bob First is retired. Jim Murrow's retired. Most of the people here are at this point. But if I were looking at people that would be good interviewers, I think John is older now and living in Seattle, I think, or not in Seattle, but out in Oregon. You and Menzies, both would be people with a lot of knowledge. You've spoken to most of the people on my list at some point. Wendy Corman is a very talented person. I don't know how much of her time is in property casualty now or not. But
she like on the life and health side?
I'm not even sure. I haven't talked to Wendy for probably a couple of years, but okay. She is a person with lots of stories, and she's extroverted and so forth. And Steve Hall would be a person who could give you a perspective too, if you were looking for someone to talk about the perils of acquisition, because we went through those together. But yeah, there are a number of. I think there probably are others that would also be very good there, but those are the ones on my list.
Well, that was awesome, Doug, and I appreciate your time. You're one of the most influential people in this industry, and you've done so much, and you've come from a great group of people. You've worked around a bunch of great people, and you continue to do so. I appreciate you. We've worked together in the past on things, and you've done a lot for me, and you've helped me a lot in a lot of ways, just like you've helped many others. So I really appreciate you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to come on and tell your story. It's an amazing story. It really is.
Well,
so thank you.
It seems like a dream looking back. And Reid, I want to say you are also a brilliant person doing great things, and you've also had a big exit, by the way. So, so don't forget that.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow, that was awesome. Doug Roller, what a story. 5 years to $20 million in revenue back then. That's amazing. For those of you that have started companies, to have that type of growth with that revenue and that amount of time is amazing. It really is. Very, very valuable. And look, you know what's interesting is that Doug, being such a good person that he is, if you caught it, he still truly feels bad about scaling at that level and leaving a couple of his customers hanging. Just amazing. Like, what a good person. You know, still to this day, he's still concerned about that. And, you know, I kind of have this theory that a lot of these guys that you hear on this podcast, they're all connected, but they're all, especially when we're talking about the founders, not the new startups and the innovators, but the founders of this industry, insurance technology, they're all connected. They all knew each other. And they were all, and I know this from personal experience, knowing these guys and working with these guys in a business sense, personally, in a lot of ways, they are all really good people, really, really good people. It's like a trend. And it's interesting. I mean, Doug is one of those. He did so much for this industry. It's an amazing success story. Duck Creek, Micro Magic, everything. I mean, the Apple computer, like that he saw way back. I mean, it's just such a cool story. But join us as we continue to bring on more founders like Doug, but also the new innovators, the startups, the people that are actually really doing stuff in our industry. Are they like the founders? You know, and one other point I want to make is when you look at a lot of these founders within this industry, a lot of people that have been really successful and continue to be successful, they kind of started in a carrier or a broker or something like that, and they really wanted just to solve a problem, right? They lived the pain. So they went off and now they built something to fix it, right? Is that the trend for the future? Are these people, the new innovators of startups, are they all connected? Stay tuned. We have a lot more cool guests, a lot of cool stuff coming up. Hey, if you see Doug out there, shake his hand. Awesome story. Awesome guy. Thanks again, Doug, for being a guest on the Insurance Technology Podcast.